and participants who are joining us on site via Zoom and through YouTube live stream. On behalf of UI GreenMetric, it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's workshop, Circular Economy Across Region, Learning from European Policies and Emerging Action Practices. Thank you for taking time to join us to this important discussion on the development of circular economy practices across regions and the valuable lessons that can be shared between Europe and Asia. Before we begin, allow me to briefly introduce today's program. We are honored to have with us Dr. Vishnu Juwano as the chairperson of UI GreenMetric, who will deliver opening remarks. Dr. Chris Hartley, our distinguished speakers for today's workshop, and Dr. Jonzak Husseini as the data and research coordinator of UI GreenMetric, who will moderate the Q&A session. Without any further ado, let us begin the workshop today. It is now my honor to invite Dr. Vishnu Juwano to deliver the opening remarks.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, distinguished guests, leaders of higher education, champions of our planet, and people in UI GreenMetric office who is right now joining us. We meet today not merely in a different room or across different time zones. We meet at a turning point of the human history. More than 6 decades ago, President John F. Kennedy stood before the world and reminded us the problems of man are man-made. Therefore, they can be solved by man. Today, as we confront the slow creeping crisis of warming planet and depleting Earth, those words have never ring truer. We are gathered here to declare that the old way of doing things, the tyranny of take, make, use, and discard is no longer just unsustainable. It is a failure of imagination. It is betrayal of future. And our task today, through the global network of UI GreenMetric, is to chart a new course towards a restorative, regenerative, circular economy. Now there are those who say this transition is too difficult. There are those who argue that economic growth and ecological stewardship cannot coexist. But let them look at the hard empirical evidence. Let them look at the data. In Europe, we see the power of systemic holisticity. Under its Circular Economy Action Plan, the European Union have proven that nations can choose a different path. Today, Europe's circular material use rate stands at 11.5%. In pioneering nations like Netherlands, they have looked at the horizons and resolved to cut their primary raw materials used by staggering 50%. This is not a utopian dream. This is a measurable statistic reality. It is an economy that has generated more than 4.3 million jobs, pumping over 120 billion euros of added value into the market. Europe has shown us that when policy aligns with purpose and when universities align with governance, economic growth doesn't have to come at the expense of the earth we inherit. But let us be clear, a regional success is not a global victory. If we turn our eyes to Asia, we see the true battleground for the future of our planet. Asia, where the pulse of global dynamism beat fastest. World Bank analysis reveal that East Asia and Pacific alone produce over 60% of the world industrial output. Yet that very same rapid expansion produced 32% of global municipal solid waste. By year 2030, less than 4 years from now, the region's urban center will swell by another 250 million people. The numbers do not lie. They present us with a choice. We can either submerge under the weight of our own waste, or we can seize the greatest economic opportunity of our generation. Because the Ellen MacArthur Foundation reminds us that transition to circular models in Asia could unlock $324 billion in economic values by 2030, while slashing greenhouse gas emission by up to 45% across global supply chains. This is the frontier of our generations, and JFK would say, we choose to enter this frontier not because it's easy, because it's hard, because that challenge is one that we are willing to accept, one are we willing to postpone, and one which we intend to win. My fellow leaders, colleagues, if the global cyclical gap stands at sobering unacceptable 7.2%, then we must ask ourselves, who will close the gap? If not us, who? If not now, when? This is the formation of UI GreenMetric and our network of over 100 universities, 1,700 universities worldwide. We cannot measure our success merely by beauty of our campuses or the convenience of our facilities. We must measure it by the depth of our institutional transformation. It means a commitment where 100% organic waste is diverted from landfills into local biolabs. It means procurement systems where minimum of 30% of all materials are post-consumer recycles. It means curriculum where 100% of our graduating engineers, economists, and our policymakers are armed with tools to close-loop infrastructure. Our university must be monuments of the past. They must be laboratories for the future. In the final analysis, the metrics we are tracked on our dashboards are not just numbers. They are testament to our character. They are measure our responsibility to those who will follow us. Let us history record that when we met today, we did not shrink from the challenges. Let it be said that we forged a driven alliance between Asia and Europe that will define the global economy. With hope in our hearts, with science as our guide, and with unyielding faith in what human cooperation can achieve, it is now my absolute honor and pleasure to declare this seminar will open. And thank you, God bless you, and may our work begin.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Pino, for the inspiring, full of spirit remarks. And that's officially opening our today's workshop. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now move to the main session of today's program. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce our speaker, Dr. Chris Hartley, as assistant professor at School of Sustainability, Arizona State University. Today, Dr. Chris Hartley will present a session entitled Implementing Circular Economy in Southeast Asia. We look forward to gaining valuable insights in how to advancing circular economy initiatives and what lessons can be applied across diverse contexts. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Chris Hartley.
Thank you all very much. I really appreciate that kind introduction. Thank you, and thank you, Professor Vishnu, for the invitation. It's been a wonderful week here, and it's really exciting to hear about everything that you're doing here at GreenMetric and at FIA as well. And really appreciate also the warmth and the hospitality of colleagues and professors and students and the staff here. It's been really wonderful, and I really hope that we can continue this collaboration into the future. The first thing I'm going to do is get up and get one of these mango juices because I've been looking at them for the past 30 minutes. I feel like I need a jolt of sugar to keep my energy up, so if you don't mind, I'll be enjoying one of these as I speak. So, the circular economy is a very interesting topic because it brings together a lot of issues that we like to think about in modern governance. It's not just about waste management, and if circular economy were only about waste management, we would be talking about recycling rather than the circular economy. And I'm going to go into a little bit of what we mean by the circular economy in terms of the scope of activities that circularity really calls upon us to embrace. Another issue about circular economy, of course, is the scope of the unit of analysis. Who is circular? Right, so that's the question. We can go from a circular organization, circular company, to a circular campus, to a circular neighborhood, city, province, country and then circular world. And we also talk about vague notions of circular ecosystems. These are networks of people who are working with each other on same kinds of circular issues. So they span organizational boundaries, they span government boundaries as well. So as you listen to some of this information about circular economy today, think about how it might relate to campuses and universities. Think about how it might perhaps even be introduced as a metric, a performance metric, perhaps in the Sustainable Universities ranking as well, just as we discussed about AI impacts as well. So perhaps this will give you a little bit of a background to understand that concept. So let's go to the next slide then. So as the professor had alluded to in his helpful opening remarks, the linear economy is really what we all inherited. It's what we're born with. And the reason that we don't describe our production systems as linear is because we inherited them and they are common sense. They're already built into the way we do things. And if we're born into a system that already exists, that has no real alternative, we don't necessarily label that system at all. It's just reality. It's just what we do. And yet when we talk about alternatives, then we begin to identify some of the problems or the faults with the system that we inherited. So if you were to go to the person on the street and say, what is our production system? What kind of production system do we have? They would probably not say, well, we have a linear production system. It's because the linear production system is just the production system, right, that we all have. And we are familiar with the concept here. It's linear because it goes in a line and it doesn't circle back around. We begin, of course, and when we're talking about materials, we begin with what we take out of the ground or we take from nature, whether that is the direct materials that go into the products we make, or whether it is what we call the factors of production, the energy that we use to operate our, the machinery in the factories and all the rest of that, which has its own extraction implications, particularly with fossil fuels being limited or finite resources. So it's take, make, and waste or dispose. And at each of those sort of points along the linear system, there are environmental implications, energy implications and resource and waste implications as well. We can talk about the scrap or sort of the waste byproducts of production within a system, and then we can talk about what happens to the product after the consumer uses it and gets rid of it. So this is how we have thought about it. The product life cycle. We do this thing that more it's a place to throw it away, to find a big pile and just put it there, and then somehow hope that nature sort of biodegrades it or breaks it down and it gets returned to the earth, or at least it's out of our way. This is how we've dealt with waste for most of us, and particularly in the modern era. And particularly in an era in which societies have gotten wealthier, consumer culture has accelerated, and now we define our lifestyle by how much stuff we own, and how much stuff we have at home, and the things on our shelves, and the nice cars, and the nice, how many different shirts we have, and all the rest of that. I say as I'm proudly wearing my brand new shirt here, and I love it. I won't be throwing it in the pile. I'll be keeping it for a long, long time. And so the idea is that you can put stuff in a pile, and then you can shovel dirt over it, and then pretend it never existed. Or you can do other things with that pile. The next most basic thing to do with that pile would be to burn it up, right? And at least you can produce heat, turn a turbine, and maybe produce some electricity, and you get rid of some of the mass of the garbage, right? But we have different levels of what we can do with that pile of material, and we also have ways that we can prevent that pile from being as big as it is right now anyway. So we see a schematic of the circular economy itself, which looks just like it is described. And inherently, we might initially believe that we kind of know what's going on with the circular economy. And inherently, we can think, okay, it has something to do with reducing waste. It has something to do with taking material and cycling back into new products. When in fact, there is a whole chain of activities that we have to study that will go into minimizing that waste. It's not, okay, we've got all this waste, now let's find something smart to do with it. There are further upstream we can do to minimize the waste or to make that waste usable or more usable. we have this term of waste valorization. Valorization means how do you make something valuable out of the waste? And the answers you see along the chart here, we can design our products in certain ways that help their waste to be more valuable. One example is modularity and interchangeability of parts. The case I always use to describe this to my students is you have a car, the car has a flat tire. So throw the car away and buy a new car. Right. Well, thank goodness for interchangeability and modularity, because all we need to do is fix the tire. Right. If we have, the computer and Windows goes down, we don't throw the whole computer away. Right. It's interchangeable. Right. So there are certain design features that allow us to extend the life of a product simply by replacing some small component. Right. There's production and remanufacturing. This has been common over many years and decades for things like engines, complex machinery. Right, to simply take it apart, remanufacture it, and replace old components with new components. They may be differently designed components, but it may just be new versions of old things. Distribution, consumption, repair, reuse, or some other opportunities. I won't get so much into that, but particularly in repair, reuse, ultimately the goal is to try to extend the life cycle of the product without having to throw it away. Next slide. So this is the our strategy. It's called various things. Sometimes we call it the waste hierarchy. And we go from the bottom to the top. The bottom is linear and the top is circular. And if we want to think about circularity versus linearity, we cannot think about it.
Recording in progress.
Years ago, he is a devastatingly productive scholar at Roskilde University, and also somehow in his life finds time to be a partner at McKinsey.
Oh, really?
Yes, Julian, I tell him, we talk almost daily. I tell him Julian is not actually a person. He is 5 people. And he's been way out front on the circular economy stuff. Look him up online, look up his Google Scholar. He's fabulously productive. But he and a few other colleagues and I have revisited an earlier piece of research by him looking at definitions of circular economy. In order for us to move forward, we have to kind of operate from an understanding, a shared understanding of what it really means. Their article in 2017 with 114 definitions of the circular economy. And then a few years ago, he said, "Hey, Chris, how'd you like to do a revisitation of that article and do 221 definitions?" So he said, "All right, well, 221 is greater than 114. Maybe it would be a better piece of work." But really, it's not so much we're going to have more definitions. What it was is the circular economy as a concept is very recent. It's a recent concept and it's quickly changing. So recycling is not a recent concept. Recycling goes way back, design goes way back, but the way we talk about things has changed. And circular economy as a term started to show up, let's say around the late 2000s. And it really started to get noticed in the academic literature around 2015, 2016, and beyond. So the definition of circularity has changed, and we wanted to reflect that in our 2023 article, which probably by now is a little bit out of date. Our point is this: circularity is, according to this definition that we derive, is much more than just material resource flows and recycling. And what's important to keep in mind, and this was a graphic that I actually made back before AI did things. So I painstakingly did all these little boxes in Microsoft Word. It took me like 3 hours. It's just infuriating, right? To get them all evenly spaced. Yeah, right. And it's not even that scientific, because some of the stuff doesn't even line up. And then we just threw it in the journal, and then they just took it. So I mean, obviously the content is what's the value here. The presentation is not maybe that exciting. But anyway, the point is this: it's a multifaceted definition, and this is not our definition. This is the definition that we derived from looking at all these other steps. What are they talking about? And then we decided to break down the elements of the definition. So enablers, what gets us to circularity, which then points us in a certain direction research-wise. We talk about industry, policymakers, consumers, and academia, the 4 big stakeholders of circular economy. Most research might just say, all right, well, it's only about what businesses do. Well, policy making is going to govern, it's going to set the parameters of what businesses do. The consumer preferences are going to set the parameter of what they do. And then, of course, academia is going to be looking at all of it, talking about it, publishing about it. So those are your enablers, or at least your stakeholders and influencers. Your core principles, well, I would say enablers, stakeholders off to the right. Core principles, we won't go into that because I've already talked a little bit about it, but we talk about sourcing, production, and consumption. That's the life cycle approach. Aims used to be just environmental quality, but now we're starting to load in other notions and societal values. Economic development. We can't convince businesses to do any of this if we can't convince them that it's going to make them rich, because they aren't charities and they don't think of themselves as charities. So just like with any sustainability issue, you have to show them why they have to do it to maximize shareholder value. If we go over to the business school, that's what they're going to be saying. They aren't doing this to be good people or good corporate citizens. Now, they will say those things in their glossy shareholders reports and in the commercials and in all the rest of this stuff on TV and everything else. But ultimately, if it's going to help them save money, that's what they're going to be doing. So it's about pitching this as an economic imperative. Social equity is kind of a new one. The idea that the green transition, the transition to sustainability, should not go on the backs of people who are politically underrepresented, who are economically disadvantaged, who in some societies are minorities in one way or another, who are historically discriminated against. That if the circular transition should include everybody, it should benefit everybody equally, right? Some people argue against that being included in this definition, not because it's not a good goal, but because it's beyond circularity. Whereas we talk about circularity as a societal phenomenon. It's not just about what you're doing with scrap metal. It's about rethinking everything, and it's about the way people behave. And then the stakeholders, which you can't see because of the thing there, generation. So we have to have a future-oriented approach to circularity. And that's very important. You might think, well, of course, future generations. That's a very tall, soft statement. That is very important for businesses, because businesses make sort of their strategic plans in 3 to 5 year increments, maybe a little bit more. But if you start planning out 10 to 15 years, businesses don't know what's going to go on in 10 to 15 years. Are we going to have a new product line in 12 years? That's kind of a ridiculous question, right? Because if it's going to be profitable, let's do it now. If we think it's going to be profitable in 10 or 15 years, that's too long to worry about. We've got other things to worry about. On the other hand, governments and societies have to think in those terms and even longer. That's why our sustainable development goal cycles go in 15-year cycles, whatever the sustainable development goal beginning in 2030 is going to be called, probably something different than SDGs, or maybe it'll be SDGs 2 or something like that. But it'll be 2030 to 2045, right? When you plan for an airport, when you plan for a train line, all the rest of this is going to be 20, 30 years plus. When you plan for education programs, you're not going to see the benefits of a childhood education program for 15 or 20 years when those people graduate and start to work. You have to think in longer terms. That's why we're talking about future generations whenever we're talking about anything more than just profitability. Next slide. So where is it now? Pratisha, you referenced the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and also Circular Economy, which is NGO or an organization, or it's an NGO that tracks the overall state of circularity in the global economy. 7.2%, I think. So in other words, how are they able to measure that? If we talk about the global economy, only 7.2% of industrial production, or that accounted for in the global economy, can be considered circular in nature. That's way, way below where we could be. It's fallen. It used to be higher, but it's always just generally been under 10% in the period during which we've been able to measure these things. So we see that environmental pressures are compelling us to think more about circularity. It's not just about carbon emissions, although circularity does relate to carbon emissions because we want to reduce the amount of industrial energy to, keep manufacturing brand new products or extracting things. Right, so there is a climate change imperative. There is limited resources or finite resource imperative behind circularity, and then it comes up against these indelible forces, two big forces. We talk about the IPAT model, where the impacts, environmental impacts, are a function of population, affluence, and technology. Right, and that's what we're seeing. We're seeing population growth continuing in many countries, even though it's falling in some others. It's falling in high consumption countries, but the countries where population growth continues will be the high consumption countries of the future, right? As the middle class gets larger, as incomes rise, and people want to fund their lifestyles, which include lots of stuff, right? So what are we going to do with all the materials then? It's going in concert with population growth and affluence, right? The other problem here is that our understandings about circular economy at the academic level, we're focused on Europe experiences, even more so than in the United States. And the reason for that is primarily, I think, because Europe has historically been further out in front on environmental legislation than most other places around the world. And the research centers and departments and scholars in Europe have been very interested in these things. So they talk about things like the Circular Economy Action Plan in Europe, which has been in place for a number of years now, and it gets certain revisions from time to time. And then individual countries as well. You've got EU-wide legislation or EU-wide directives or other types of ideas to help promote circularity. Then you've got legislation at the national level. Denmark, Netherlands, Germany, some of these other places do a pretty good job compared to most countries of trying to promote circularity in their industries through regulations and policies and legislation. So that's where the research information or the research efforts have been focused. There is an opportunity to bring circular economy research to this region. Why would it be important in this region? Because, of course, the amount of industrial production occurs here. How much industrial production is occurring in Denmark and Netherlands compared to Indonesia? Very, very, very small, very little. And yet, they do have these regulations on the book. So it's easier for them to say we're going to be really tough on circularity when a lot of their economy is actually supported by other types of industries, knowledge industry, and healthcare and services and these kind of post-industrial industries. So the work that I've been doing recently is trying to bring that to Southeast Asia. There, a fair amount of conceptual and theoretical work done on, Southeast Asia, sort of industrial transformation, sustainability, and then the power plays and dynamics and amidst all of that, including global North Pole South dynamics. But empirical stuff's lacking, right? So at least lacking in the English publication literature, the top journals.
Yeah.
So I ran a survey in Singapore, and I'll talk about that now, and also in Hong Kong, of industrial producers in these two cities, that whether they're adopting circularity, how they understand it, what the barriers to transitioning are, what the enablers are, et cetera. And initially, I decided to do Hong Kong because I was 6 years in Hong Kong and have some knowledge of it. Singapore, I was 4 years in Singapore and I have some knowledge of that. And Hong Kong and Singapore are very comparable because, they're small, contained, relatively high income, and also relatively post-industrial as well. So the industries that remain, you would think would be maybe a little bit more developed or evolved in their sustainability practices, but that's just a hypothesis. What I hope to do with this work is to bring it to Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, and other places, look at larger scale countries where manufacturing still plays an important role, and see how those insights stack up. So next slide. So Singapore, needs no introduction among us here. When I go other places to talk about this, you kind of do. And I often get the question, what part of China, Singapore, and these kinds of things, right? So sometimes
Anywhere you can, or?
yeah, sometimes I've been asked that question before. So Singapore needs no introduction here. So advanced economy now moved very, very quickly through its industrialization phases, its raw style growth stages, and it's now at the point where you could say it's post-industrial, knowledge-based, and research, higher education. But there is also some manufacturing there, including petrochemicals. If you've been to the Jurong industrial estate, Jurong Island, and other industrial estates on the island, the petrochemical industry is a pretty big deal there. It's related to petroleum and its processing of that into chemicals and other consumer goods and all the rest of that. So that's one thing that makes Singapore interesting is potentially advanced level manufacturing. Another is its focus of its government on sustainability itself and the resources they have to devote to that. So they're pretty far along in as an example of what good urban sustainability looks like because they have the advantage of a lot of money. They have fairly small geographically constrained island where it's pretty easy to get things done. They don't have a vast hinterland to worry about and all the rest of this. So You could say, well, how would learning from Singapore apply to us? Because we aren't like that. Most countries aren't like that. Which is why I suggest then consider the scale, right? Don't think of it as a country, even though it is. Think of it as a city. Okay. Look at it as a city scale system. And we could open our minds to, sustainable or circular urban planning and these other types of things. So it's really quite interesting. And yet I think there's more opportunity to study it from an empirical context. Next slide. So I decided to run a survey. I've done both of these surveys this year in March and April. So I just took possession of the data. The Singapore data came in a little sooner than the Hong Kong data, but I'll have the Hong Kong data at the end of the presentation. And it was 100 respondents, not a lot, but enough to do some statistical work with. These were owners and managers or operators of manufacturing enterprises in Singapore, many of which are, as you see here, a majority of which employ 250 or more. So not necessarily a lot of SMEs, but some SMEs in that group. And so that was how we screened. And then I hired a survey firm, Dynamica, to conduct the survey. And when we have that sort of breakdown, mostly for-profit enterprises. Next slide. And of course, as I said from the research question before, which I should have mentioned, so what are the enablers and the constraints to pursuing the circular economy within your organization? And that can be a variety of different things. We'll look at how those break down and operationalize here. So my dependent variables of the model, we did 2 dependent variables. And by the way, I should mention, and you saw on the opening slide, this is in collaboration with Stelianos Saropoulos, also an assistant professor at the School of Sustainability at Arizona State University. So we're both working on this paper together. And these 2 papers actually will be hopefully getting them under review soon. So we had this idea to create not just single dependent variables based on one question, but an index. And the circular implementation intensity index, which I have to give, I think I have to give him credit for thinking of that, is just an index of a variety of different questions I asked these respondents about what they're doing to implement circularity, not just recycling, but through design, through and other things. And I have the questions. We'll see those in a moment. And then there's a circularity maturity indicator. So that's just kind of what percentage of your activities can be considered circular. So I'm trying to predict those things based on your IVs, the independent variables, which are going to be circularity enablers and barriers. So things that help you and things that hurt you, right? And I'm looking at the relationship between those 2 things. So we'll go to the next slide. So this is, and maybe we can push the camera screen thing up to the right there, just so we can see people. Sarah, can you see that?
Please,
You just slide it.
slide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the implementation intensity index, which is interesting. Now think about this. Whenever you hear a presentation from somebody, don't just think about what the answers are and what the message is. Think about what their methods are. And I'm walking you through this in a way that I'm trying to be very transparent about the struggles and the way of thinking. When I looked at all this, I asked all these questions individually because I thought, well, these are going to be kind of interesting. Like you see, we implement energy efficient efforts in our production processes. We offer take back, return, or collection programs for products that have already been used, things like that, all kinds of stuff. And I just set a brainstorm, like, what are all the questions I would ask somebody that would relate to circularity? And then maybe test each one of those in its own regression or whatever. And then it was like, well, that's overkill. Right? How about you create a single, index that combines all these? And this is the index. It's combined. I don't know how many questions that is, but something like 18, maybe something like that. So each one is going to have their own independent kind of statistics, and you could identify which one of those individually to test. Maybe if they are standing out in some way. Like if you look at the means all cluster in the 3 range. Somehow, it looks like the highest is 3.96. So you might want to pull that one out. We implement energy efficient efforts. And then you might want to test the lowest one as well. individually, which looks like 3.26. Our products are designed for repairability. That's interesting, yeah, even right there, because design implies it's not something that, oh, we're going to do everything we already did, and then we're just going to back end it all with circularity. We're going to decide, oh, what can we do to be circularity? But design is, we know we want to be circular. So before we even start making the product, let's design it in a way that we know it's going to be easy to make it circular. There's a big difference between those two things. One is just tacking something on at the end. The other one is actually anticipating it and planning for it. So anyway, that's just the summary data for all of that. We can, and then you can just look at to a small, moderate, large, very large, and you can see some of the percentages there as well. Kind of reveals some. But we didn't really get into that at that level of detail. We just combined them all, did an equal weighting and developed our index. Next slide. This is that second dependent variable, the maturity indicator, which is only one question. It's not an index. And it was a single item measure, which best describes your organization's involvement in circular practices. And it was just no plans, considering we have plans, we're testing it, and we're doing it. And what's interesting about this is we could have said, just on a scale of 1 to 5, you know, how circular are you? But I think the respondents needed more guiding than that, right? Because somebody might say 4 out of 5 is I'm thinking about being circular. Another person might say 4 out of 5 is like, I'm already circular, but I'm not doing a great job at it. I'd like to be doing better. So it's just really all over the place. So you can't trust that there's going to be sort of the same level of perception among the different respondents. So we kind of led them with these, and we tried to phrase it in a way, if you're going to use this statistically, right? If they're going to be a linear relationship from 1 to 5, which is what you really need, you know, as an assumption based on OLS regression or whatever. You've got to make sure that the differences between each of these is roughly the same, right? So the difference between no plans and considering evaluation, that difference is roughly equal to the difference between testing and implementing, right, in the minds. It's not like one is really way on out. It's not like no plans, considering, have definite plans, testing, and then the fifth one is something like, you know, I'm committed to circular world or something like that, which is way up at the end. It's got to be pretty even. So anyway, you can kind of grill me on the selection of the terms, but that's what we used. You know, this is hopefully going to be satisfying enough for the reviewers. So ordinal item. All right, next slide. Now this is independent variables. And by the way, interrupt me if you know you have a question at any point. You know, I talk a lot. I'm a professional talker, as I like to say, in the classroom, and I talk on paper too. That's the writing, but that does not mean I, you know, have to command the space all the time. So please interrupt me. Enablers and barriers; those were also index variables, and the enablers, each one of those is an index. So economic enablers, we didn't just say what economic factors are holding you back, or what economic factors help you. You can't say that. Everybody's gonna they're gonna run off into the corner with all their own ideas and they'll believe them. So we have a series of questions that are economic, series of questions that are technical, and all the rest of this. Now, where do those come from? Economic, technical, and some of those come from work that Julian and I did on types of barriers, which are, we classify them into market barriers, which are circular products are too expensive, so our customers won't buy them. AI, right, where the government's always playing catch up. So they feel that, you know, decision makers and policymakers aren't moving fast enough to account for the things they want to do. And then there are technical barriers. So we need the equipment to be able to do these things. If you're going to redesign your production process, it's not just, you know, only a matter of retraining a worker or something. It's like your equipment might not let you do that. Do you have equipment that'll clean and sort, you know, scrap waste? Do you have a way to, you know, to weigh it? Do you have a way to analyze what components are within this thing? I mean, a lot are talking about using AI to sort of analyze components of scrap products or scrap materials as well. And then there are cultural factors also. This is just pushback within an organization. People that either don't believe you need to do this. It's just a cost. It's a woke thing. It's a green thing. We don't need it. All the rest of that. So that's cultural barrier. But we added a few. We had environmental, and we're talking about both enablers and constraints. Barriers. When I say barrier, I mean constraint. You should probably unify that language there. So anyway, the number of items is the number of questions that were used in the formation of the index. So if we go to the next slide. So this is the enablers. So for enabler category for economic, right? So those and these weren't questions. These were just level of agreement 1 to 5. Circular practices reduce their costs. Circular practices, et cetera, et cetera. 2 technological questions, 3 supply chain, 2 policy institutional, a couple of organizational ones. That's within organizations. Social. So that's more external. We experience society or stakeholder pressure to implement sustainable practices. Our customers want it. And then finally, the environmental one as well. So that's how we put together those. And if we go to the next slide, those are the barrier measures. So again, if you look to the right, the barrier category, 3 questions were used to construct the economic category, 3 technological, 3 supply chain policy, and then organizational or 5. So, and I'm trying to think back in doing this. I don't know why I mean, a lot of those questions are similar in the enablers as in the various, they're slightly different. I have to go back and think about why they were slightly different. But anyway, nonetheless, that's how we constructed the indices. If you go to the next slide. Finally, before we get to the results, control variables. So we just controlled for size of the organization. Surprisingly, actually found that there were tended to be a little bit larger. And those were the responses 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Those aren't the number of organizations for that. So you respond. If you're 0, you're 1, whatever. So the mean was 4.51, which shows these are really relatively large organizations. And then what percentage of organizations supply chain is located in the same point, right? So we wanted to know that as a kind of control because a lot of these organizations have global supply chain, et cetera. So next slide. So here are the results. And we ran a number of models. The series of models, it's model 1. A to G is just taking each one of those enabler indices, which is a single variable, and then testing it on the dependent variable. In this case, for circular implementation intensity. So I had it mixed around. So okay, you can go forward now. I should have put implementation intensity. Yeah, that's right. So implementation intensity is dependent variable 1 or just the individual ones. Models 2 are the individual one controls, and then model 3 are all of them together. And then with each of the predictors, and this is really the one you want to look at because it's the full model. Hopefully it's not over specified, but I'm sure the reviewers will tell us that. But we see a couple of significant results there. Supply chain and organizational enablers. That is, we are enabled to be circular by what our suppliers are doing, by what our collaborators are doing, right? Because and think about that. If you sell this mango juice and you say it's a circular product, all you did was make the juice. And maybe that's circular because, when the mango skins are all laying there and you squeeze them to get more juice out of them or you burn them up or you do something with them, you call it circular. But you had to get the straw from somewhere, you had to get the plastic from somewhere, you got to know what they did, right? So if you're collaborating with suppliers or other collaborators, you can confidently tell your customers that you are. Now, we do have rating systems and all the rest of that it'll trace these types of things, but sometimes the regulations on those claims is a little bit weak. The organizational enablers are sort of internal things, might be knowledge, worker capacity, skill sets, upskilling, and all the rest of that, right? So those are the 2 that we found. If we go to the next one, we also look at circularity implementation intensity, the same dependent variable, but now we're looking at the barriers, so the constraints here, right? So same thing, the first set of models was the individual ones. The second set of models, individual plus the controls. Then the model 3 is what we're really interested in, nothing significant. So, and lack of significance is a finding. Lack of significance is significant sometimes. So we don't really know quite what to say about that, except that these barriers don't seem to be impacting, which can go against some of the literature that says, oh yeah, economic barriers are keeping people from being circular. It's like, well, that's not temporal, at least not according to our little set. Next slide. Now we go to circularity maturity. That was, how are we being circular at all? 1 to 5. Right, and then I'm not explaining all the rest of it, but you go over this is these are enablers. No, nothing of significance. That we saw no association with amount of circularity we think we're doing. Next slide is just one, and that's environmental barriers as well, which you have to dig into. Now, keep in mind that, a quantitative analysis like this is just the first step, right? Because if you identify something significant, you don't know why, you need to go back to the literature, try to find out if somebody else had the same finding. Or what do? More work. What kind of work you do? Another survey? No. You get out into the field and you talk to people, right? So we're going to try to use some of the results of this to pitch a grant proposal that allows us to go to these places and talk to people and see, well, what are they really experiencing? So this is just, this is where mixed methods really needs to be highlighted, but I'm just doing, one side today. So next slide. Now, so major findings, as I said, supply chain organizational enablers, those were, that was the most notable finding. Barriers, kind of limited or insignificant influence. We also saw larger firms demonstrate more mature circular economy practices than smaller firms. That is contrary to literature. A lot of literature says smaller firms are more circular because they're fast and footloose, fancy free, and they're new. So, they're plugged into all the new stuff. Whereas this older dinosaur firm that's been doing something for 1,000,000 years, like, how are they going to change? It's like, it's like asking somebody to change their mind about something, right? The older they get, the more set in their ways they are. But this says no. So maybe there's something about larger firms. Maybe it's their ability, it's capital they have to invest in new equipment. Maybe it's the interchangeability of skill sets and employees. They can cycle them in. I don't know. That's what we have to start getting on the ground and interviewing for. Government financial support, guidance, clear policies, and encourage CE transition. So that was some of the policy side of it as well. And I'm going to show you a little bit more of that in the Hong Kong findings. So next slide. Same survey in Hong Kong, and I will give you all the background summary statistics. So just got straight to the regressions here. So I ran it in Hong Kong. Hong Kong was, do I include the number? No, but the N was about 212, 215, something like that. We had more than double the respondents in Hong Kong in Singapore, which was interesting. And although it took much longer. Very strong significance on economic and technological enablers of circularity implementation intensity. So in Hong Kong, right, having a technological advance, sort of advantage helps you. This directly talks to business series. For those of you, anybody in business school or MBA people, right? This is the resource-based view. This is our.
She's a MBA alumni.
Oh, MBA alumni. Oh, fellow MBA. I got a long time ago too. Yeah. So the business people here, yeah, the corporate folks are well represented, and it's the idea of the resource-based view. If you have better resources, better internal resources, you're gonna be more competitive in the marketplace, right? You've got better stuff. And a lot of that these days translates into technology. Some resources are commodities, other resources you can really establish a competitive advantage on. You might AI and stuff like that, right? And environmental enablers significant as well. Next slide. Now these are the big barriers here. Only barrier we saw was economic barrier, and that was of interest. But the policy barrier, we expect the barriers to be negative. We expect the sign to be negative, but the policy barrier sign was positive. So this is very unexpected. So what this says is the more you're circular you are, the more you perceive that the policy barriers are a problem. Which is kind of weird, right? They go in the same thing. It's like you would expect to be more circular if you think, well, the more circular, if you're really, really circular, you're probably going to think, oh, I've got really circular, but policy, and we've done policy really isn't the problem. And so policy hasn't held you back. But in this case, the more circular ones are also saying more and more that policy is a problem. So it's a very peculiar thing. I think it's the most odd finding of the Hong Kong one, and we didn't find that in Singapore one. We're trying to write up the Hong Kong one separately, so we have a little bit of a different story. And then this shows up again, but we'll go to the next slide. And that's the enablers of maturity, just 1 to 5, how circular are you? Technological enablers there, shows up as significant positive. So that's what we expect. And then on over to the next slide to barriers. There again, we see policy barriers, positive sign, and significant. So weird. So those circularity, maturity, how circular are we, and then circular implementation. Those two things are very related. I got a little correlation at the end. But policy barriers and then organizational barriers, the sign is as we expected, it's negative. and significant. So, you know, the more circular we are, you know, the less we think organizational barriers are a problem. That's basically what it says. So interesting findings there. The policy one really tells an interesting story, and I'm glad it tells an interesting story as opposed to all the rest of it, because that's my field. You know, if it's the technological barriers or something, I'd have to go talk to my friends over in engineering to decide what that's all about. So next slide here. Comparing the two for the all variable models, which is the model over to the very right. And I've just organized it enablers, barriers, and then implementation intensity, circular maturity, right? So this is just an overview of what I found. And I highlighted that policy and the sign on policy was positive in the two Hong Kong ones for barriers, right? And that's really kind of the most interesting one. Interestingly, implementation intensity and circular maturity differ in terms of the barriers. That economic barriers were significant for intensity, but organizational barriers and maturity. Again, a very subtle, very nuanced finding. Probably can dig in and think about things, but we just took possession of the data, so we're really beginning to think about this. Next slide. Now, this is kind of what I get into is why the unexpected sign or direction. This is some of my, you know, this is the interesting part of being a researcher, right? Is you run all the data, you get all this, you got to figure out why did it not, you know, go like I thought it would go. And this is where you earn your money, because that's what you got your education for. Everybody you can teach anybody how to run a regression, right? But how do you interpret it? You know, you got a little bit of knowledge of literature, a little bit of wisdom, a little bit of insight, and all the rest of that. So here I am, and please let me know if you have insights on that. First of all, it may be how we operationalize policy barriers, it may be the questions we used, right? So the questions we used, existing regulations hinder implementation. We don't have government support. Meaning government doesn't help us out with financial stuff, and non-financial would be things like education programs, training programs, and maybe indirectly like infrastructure, things like that. And then finally, we're unclear about what forms of government support. So it's like we don't know what's out there. We don't have time to find out because, you know, we're too busy working, right? So nobody told us there's a program. This happens all the time. There's scholarships out there that you never got because, you know, it's sitting on a website somewhere, nobody applies. So they're like, well, nobody applies, so we won't give it out this year. You know, there's a transaction cost to everything, right? You got to go out and find it. And that may be showing some of how it misfires. Now, here, the final 3 bullet points are questions I'm kind of wondering. Do firms that face barriers work harder to overcome them? Right. So that may be the first one. So so think about this. The firm that implements circular economy very well also thinks that policy barriers are very high. That's what we're getting at here, right? So the firm that thought they had a lot of policy barriers work
Recording in progress.
really Singapore, probably you can say Hong Kong, certain way too. I'm comfortable criticizing one or the other because that's so much time about them. And thus, do we think these things would happen in Indonesia or in Malaysia or Thailand, right? Which is where I hope to take the research next, which leads us to our conversation, you know, about running the survey here through the faculty, maybe, and redoing all this. So good opportunities for people to be involved with that if you're interested, and we'll get some publications out of that pretty quickly. And we'd love to do also a region-wide one where we circular barriers and enablers. And it's also survey only, so survey here in Indonesia, and then let's hit the field, an interview questionnaire, go out and talk to people. And there are people here in the room, and that's where, and the faculty who are much better qualified than I am to hit the ground and get the t-shirt, go talk to manufacturers. I probably would not be very effective at doing that. We do that in the US, but not here. So again, collaboration opportunities, if people are interested. And then, of course, some of these other kind of milk and honey findings, very general things, right? So CE transition requires, circular economy transition requires all these things. It's not just buy the best equipment or train your people, but you got to partner with the right people. You have to benefit from the right balance of legislation and regulation, a fair amount, but not onerous, not too much. And the larger companies can, of course, be involved in that discussion, influencing the regulations that get put onto them. That third bullet point is my favorite, and that is a running theme in all of my work. Policies cannot fix unsustainable business models. So you can't just sort of implement a policy and then think a business is going to change, because they've got all these other factors. They got internal cultural factors, organizational factors. They have shareholders screaming at them in meetings. They have owners, if it's a privately owned thing, they have, mom and dad in their mansion screaming at, no, you're not profitable enough. This is principal agent theory. We're getting back to business now, so that's an aspect of that. And more than this, and I didn't mention this here, but actually it just occurred to me just now because of the insignificance of technological enablers. What does that tell you? Buying cool tech doesn't solve the problem. That is like the total core of most of the work that I do, right? On circular economy, on AI data centers, and on smart cities. Cool tech doesn't solve it. So that's a big finding from this. And then the last point there, system-wide cultural organizational change is necessary, right? So that's a good lesson for all of sustainability. Right, and I think that, when we talk about, I used to research smart cities, so cities are, it's by cool tech. I can see smart city stuff out here on the road, taking pictures of license plates and all that, all those little smart cities things. And yes, it can move the needle on little aspects, right? But it's going to make you sustainable. Sustainability is so much more broadly defined. Smartness, quote, more broadly defined, because it's not just, does our infrastructure operate well? It's how are our people doing? How's the community doing? As they say, are people okay? And we don't know. Smartness doesn't necessarily get us closer to okay. It might get us, a more efficient transport system. It might get us some things that maybe help people do a little better. It does not solve deep-seated problems. The cool tech won't solve your inequality problem. We have one in the US and in most countries. It's not going to solve prejudice and discrimination. It's not going to solve old style culture and thinking about infrastructure and the way government works. It's not going to solve a non-democratic system. It's not going to do all those things, right? But I think we live in an era where technology is really the thing on the horizon that's going to save us. Techno-optimism, whether it's AI or sustainability tech, circular economy tech, and I think we're disappointed in the results. We think it's going to usher in some green revolution. No, it's not. Our behavioral change will. Our desire to do it, and getting people aboard and leading that cause is going to help that. So anyway, I think that was it. Is there another slide? Probably not. Let's see. Nope, that was just the correlations if you wanted to see them, but not that exciting compared to what we just said. So anyway, thank you all very much for being a good audience. Appreciate it, and be happy to take any questions. Just remember that I am talking narrowly about circularity here, but I want to say in the context of UI GreenMetric that maybe circularity can be a metric and sustainability, and maybe already is. Maybe there's. I'm sure you asked about recycling. Yeah. So it's in there somewhere. Maybe the definition could be expanded a little beyond recycling, and then also just think about what research opportunities there are in this. These haven't been published yet because we just got the data, but they're going to be out there. We're going to get 6 papers out of that. Not just those, but there's other data that we've got. Well, one of my colleagues, Stelios, is a psychologist, so he's doing a lot of conceptual variable stuff. So we're going to squeeze as much out of this as we can, but would love to bring that work here to NEJ and to Jakarta and to the university. So
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Grace Hartley, for the insightful and thought-provoking presentation. We will now proceed to the question and answer session. And this session will be with I would like to introduce Dr. Joseph Hussaini as the Data and Research Coordinator that will serve as the moderator. Dr. Joseph, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Mrs. Raihana, for the introduction. And also thank you, Dr. Hartley, for an interesting and insightful presentation. In my note, Dr. Hartley has shared with us related to the circular economy fundamentals and also his findings from his recent research on circular economy implementation, particularly in Singapore and Hong Kong, which offer valuable insight into the opportunities and challenges in facing circular economy transition in Asia. And now we will open the floor for question from our participant. Perhaps for participant joining us here, you can raise your hand or directly ask the question to Dr. Hartley. Or for participant joining through Zoom, you can also raise your hand or submit your question through chat, and we'll deliver the question to Dr. Hartley. So please, the floor is now open. Yes.
Thank you, moderator, and also Dr. Hartley for your very insightful presentation. And it makes me wonder, what is the result if we do the research in Indonesia or in Jakarta? Because we can see that in the Hong Kong, the policy have a negative impact, for the economy. And I guess it will also happen here in Indonesia, but maybe in Indonesia we will find some new variables that will happen here, because yeah, you will see that for the policy, is there any support from the government or financially and non-financially? And maybe we will also find Indonesia, we also may facing the same problems due to financial support from the government. And also that you mentioned about the smart cities and etc. And I think you're right, because in my experience for the digitalization in Indonesia, there are some area in some region in Indonesia that are really not prepared for digitalization. And it's not because the government didn't support it, because the community isn't ready yet. The community isn't ready yet, and the infrastructure of digitalization is not ready yet. A few weeks ago, I go to Balau village in South Kalimantan, and the village is the government give the title of independent village. So the government think that the village is ready for digitalization and etc. But when I go there, I ask about the public service in the village, and the village leaders say that the people or the community is not ready yet for digitalization, because they are still more convenient with the traditional ways of public services, like meeting the officer and something like that. So I think about smart cities, we will have very various variables in Indonesia. Maybe like is it will happen differently in the urban area or the rural area, and also the region geographies. There are some region in Indonesia that are still not have a strong signal for internet, and then also the readiness of the community. Is it the community ready or not? Is it they are well informed? Well, can they have smartphone or not? And also about the age difference and generational gap. Are still baby boomers and the millennial and the Gen Z that have a very various experience with digitalization. So I think if we do the research in Indonesia, we will have a various variables that will happen here, not only for the policy, but also in the community as well. And I know if in your research, you also talk about the goals or the roles of the, like social enterprise to enhance the circular economy in a region because uh, when I see that very circular economy in Indonesia is also supported by the role of the social enterprise that we have here because there are the social enterprise like they have some part of the or roles of the government that cannot be done by the government itself, but then it will be done by the social enterprise because they have some mission, social mission to help the community, to empowering the community, and also in form of the circular economy. Maybe it's
Well, thank you. You know, your comment is really very valuable in time, and I'm thinking about what is going to be different about the findings that we have here. And it's good, that's good. We want to tell a different story, you know, on one hand, but it is also expected. Because I think some of the underlying variables are going to reflect some sort of anthologies in preparation.
Yes.
Back on Tuesday, I mentioned about, we were talking about preparation, people or organizations to adopt technology, something like that. And with my colleague, Wumin Kong at the National University of Singapore, and I did a smart city readiness study, based in Vietnam. And, finding that, yeah, tech was part of it, and infrastructure is part of it, but the quality of governance was really the biggest concern, really the biggest holdback. And there was corruption, perceptions of corruption, but some other things as well, and decision-making processes and all the rest of that. Because smart, just like circularity, can mean something much more than just the physical processes. And it has to mean much more than the physical processes because it really gets into the decisions. So I think that, you know, the infrastructure needed and looking at smart cities, comparing that to circular economy, both of them are going to need advanced technology for sure. So, and in most cases, that advanced technology is going to rely on connectivity, broadband connectivity. So your broadband, and even with AI data centers, that connectivity, there's a certain term that I've forgotten, but it's a type of sort of hyper broadband, you know, where the light doesn't get converted in digits or something like that. I mean, it's super fast.
Yeah.
So you like next generation or something like that. So, yeah, I mean, do you have the capacity to roll that out? I think it raises an issue of urban, rural, or sort of regional imbalances as well. That's why studying performance on this or that, you know, obscures a lot of the variation. And I think that just as we've seen disparities in economic development across regions, those historical disparities will show up in the new things that we do. Because those historical disparities, the wealthy ones are going to be the ones to have built out more of the infrastructure and developed more, and thus they're better prepared for these next things. So they're on a trajectory that is just really not going to be closed by circular economy, smartness, or any of the rest of them, right? If anything, it'll make it even more. It's just kind of like they say with AI, right? The winners are going to keep on winning even more,
Yeah.
and the people who aren't winning keep on not winning even more. It's the K-shaped economy, right?
Yeah.
You know, and so
Indonesia and also what we have mentioned that probably more the brand more than housing.
okay, yeah.
Anyway. Thank you for your inspiring presentation. Some of my questions actually are already answered before. But however, I still would like to get to confirm again because currently my research is exploring about how multi-level taxation, yeah, can be designed to accelerate circular economic adoption in the cement industry.
Multi-level.
Taxation, tax.
Oh, taxation. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. I noted that in some slides before the finding of your research about the policy is positive, right? What is the meaning actually? What is the meaning?
The meaning is that as that there's an association between as companies are more circular, they perceive that policy barriers are more, you know, they're greater policy barriers,
Yeah.
more of a problem, you
Yeah.
would say.
Actually, it's I refer to the questions and answer I done with the cement industry. representing majority of the cement leaders in Indonesia, from a lot of variable that they are talking why they do the circular economy things or not in their company. One of it, they refer to the policy, especially taxation policy, especially. Yeah, why? Because every time they would like to do the business flow changes or business development changes, they should also have the, analysis from their tax department, whether whatever they are going to do about the expenditure will have special treatment or not from the tax point of view. Yeah, and then what I would like to get your more, what is it, Sam, probably, yeah, from your previous experience. Do you think how is the importance of the tax policy role, as a policy instrument in accelerating circular economic adoption?
Right.
Yeah.
That is a good question. I'm gonna answer that by saying we need to add that. Because when we talk about the three questions that are the basis of the policy index.
Okay.
The questions are existing regulations hinder implementation. It's pretty vague. We lack sufficient government support, financial or non-financial. And we are unclear about what forms of support are available, financial or non-financial. We haven't asked about tax. Government financial support can probably be interpreted a number of different ways. It could be maybe direct transfers and subsidies. No, it could be maybe, low interest loans on technology, things like that. But then, of course, tax arrangements can be used to accomplish the same thing, right? Through tax credits on the amount of investment you make in green tech, circular technology, something to that effect. So I think tax can be a very important incentive because, it really does move the dial on just those direct economic calculations, right? Everything these organizations are going to do is going to be based on just a cost benefit analysis, right? And even consulting the tax department in the office is still going to give you an ability to be even more intricate in that cost benefit calculation. Right, so whether it comes, that the financial benefits come in the form of direct subsidies, or I don't have to pay as much in taxes. Either way, that cost benefit analysis goes more in favor of circularity if it's designed correctly. Right, now you had mentioned, I believe you said multi-level taxation. So that's taxation across levels of government, federal, provincial, and state, or what's the multi-level aspect?
Well, in Indonesia, regional tax,
Okay.
regional tax for the raw material, dig up or mining from the area. In this cement industry, we take the raw material from mountain. Yeah, so I believe that include in the whole things of the circular economy from the beginning to the end. And I believe this is will be never end if the circular economy role is running well, right? So what I mean with the multi-level taxation is actually in some article I read from outside Indonesia, they also try to ensure that the any policy issued by let's say industrial ministry will also follow by the tax policy rules, which can become the incentive or disincentive position to ensure that the industrial regulation also can be complied by the industry.
Sure.
That's what I mean. So currently in Indonesia, we do have some regulation that related to the environment things. Yeah, but it's only partial. Like for the waste, and there is a retribution imposed if your company have too much waste, which is not circulate inside the system. However, on the industrial ministry or environmental ministry, they also give if your company can get proper bulk status for the waste processing, for the waste processing, it's only stop there. It's only stop there. So there is no other related with the final reporting of the company performance. There is no mingling with, there is no related with the other regulation from the other aspect or sector. That's why I think so. I would like to recommend about this multi-level application where all the regulation either from the industrial ministry, from the financial ministry, have the connection and linkage. That's what I
Yeah, well, that's a good point. Interagency collaboration and consistency. The activities, one have to support the other. There can't be contradictions. And I think contradictions as a result of silo-based thinking or lack of coordination is a big problem, and it also reflects lack of capacity as well. These individual agencies might not have the capacity to research what's going on together or actually make an effort to try to align what we're doing with what they're doing. And then who gives, right? In the sense of if we're going to align, why don't you align with me? Why don't I have to align with you, right? So then it becomes a negotiation about let's try to meet in the middle. And when you try to meet in the middle, you got a million different points along the continuum. So that's a lot of discussions and effort. Anyway, be that as it may, I think from a methodological point of view, in studying this here, you'd have to say, okay, there's a national level policy, which is fine. It is what it is, and we can measure its effect. If we look at regional policies, and you said that so certain regions, whether they're provinces or states, have the prerogative to tax. Additionally, is there variation in that from region to region? They don't all do the same one, right? Do they do different ones? So they're like if you go West Java, East Java, or something, Batam, are they?
different with West Java can be different with the South Sumatra or something.
So if they're all different, that's, that may be from a policy or practical perspective, that may be a little strange or a problem. From a methodological perspective, that's great. That's great. I'm glad to hear that.
Another area of research.
There's variation. You have a variation in one, and does it explain variation in the other? Right, that's all you need to do. Now, what you'd have to do here is come up with a kind of like you've done with the sustainability index for universities, you come up with the circularity index and try somehow to measure that either within a representative sample of companies within each region, or you might try to measure it region-wide, although measuring region-wide circularity gonna be tricky and really weird. Just like, global surveys say global circularity is 7.2%. Nobody else tries to measure that. So we just use that number. We don't really know how accurate it is, but the point being, you'd have to get your outcome variable, which is level of circularity.
Yeah.
And then your input variable would be, these, and furthermore, if they're each able to do their own, that might vary over time as well. They might have raised it or lowered it, depending on different administrations or whatever else. Problem there is, can you get circularity information also longitudinally? And I don't think you can, because you're just going to be going back and asking people, how circular are you 10 years ago? Who's going to answer that question? Now, if you create an index of circularity based on data that does exist at that time. So for example, if you just want to be really crude about it and just say resource flows, recycling, something like that. If you do have data on that going back far enough, then you can kind of put together panel data, right? 10 years, how X number of provinces, and then within each province, 5 representative companies or something like that. It's a real project. Sounds like a dissertation project. But and then you can build a lot of different variables. So you don't have to just ask about circular, you can ask about all kinds of other things, infrastructure investment and broadband connectivity, and then you can either enter societal variables, income, political variables, you could run surveys like that. But those are interesting points, I think. And it's so massive. I mean, when you scale it from Singapore and Hong Kong to Indonesia, right, you've got all this variation, which is really fun from a study point of view. And so thanks for bringing that up.
Thank you.
Interesting work. Yeah.
I'm trying to do the development to be applied in my company.
Oh, good. Great, great.
Yeah.
All right, good. Action research.
Yeah.
Research with impact.
Innovation work.
Yeah.
Innovation program called, company code. Yeah, to do something, and the circular economy actually already become the issue in the last 10 years.
Yeah, okay, good, good. All right, well, send me an email if you want to hear more. You want me to come back for a visit? Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Bu Eka, for the question. And for the next question, perhaps I believe my colleague Ferdi, President, before.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm from Program Organizer at UI GreenMetric. So in the last 2025 and early 2026, I was included one of the research funding by the BRAIN from the Research Center for for the Circular Economy. And then we are trying to investigate the actual analysis into developing cities using qualitative analysis, using social network analysis, and also corresponding analysis. And then the preliminary result that we have now is that the private sector actors greater influence each other for the waste management system in Indonesia. And this very ironic because we saw that the government have really so many programs and also so many facilities like TPST or in the English TPST, TPST KL, TPST Indonesia. And then but one thing that the key observation that we have already very unique is we do not formalize the informal collectors atau pemulung or something in our national development regulation for waste management system. So my question is based on your previous research or your point of view, do you think that formalizing informal collectors could be a viable solution to improving something like the circular cities in the next future? Because if we use the circularity context and also socio-economic that maybe produced for a long time in European, we don't have any global sort context. So if you go to the developing countries, or especially if we have a specific case study in developing cities, we saw that an informal collector is one of the very biggest. In Indonesia, we have conducted a survey into different cities, Sumatera and Surabaya, and I found that there's a very unique thing because the unique problem because the informal collectors recovery waste streams, they are not collected by any others. Something like waste, they were not collected by the government and also the private sector. This is not very beneficial for the private sector. And also maybe the government do not have any facilities to process this waste. But for the informal collector, they have so many things or so many ways to do this to be beneficial for them. And also for the second question, for the following question, because in Asian countries, we saw that we have a lot of underground economics or shadow market, something like unregulated or unregistered economies in our side. As you mentioned, now in Singapore and Hong Kong as developed countries, we saw that the global economics tend to be linear than circular, 10% like you said before. I would think that is it possible to in developing countries to in developed countries we push so many technological advancements, but in developing countries we have something, for example, informal collectors, something kind of underground economy. So is it possible to push the economic initiative through the underground economies that we have in developing countries? Yeah, thank you.
Very interesting, bunch of very interesting research topics there. So thank you so much for that. And I think that it's interesting because it raises the sort of social aspects of the circular economy and the impacts of that. Who do you exclude? Whose livelihoods do you get rid of when you make a decision about going circular or going more sustainable, right? But then it also highlights the global north, global south dynamic, or developed, non-developed, whatever term you like to use, And I think it highlights a gap in the literature because, as I said before, most of the circular economy research coming out of the EU, I've not seen much about informal, sort of capacities in those areas. And we have seen work done on, informal, of course, a lot of work done on informal markets or, waste management and collection in other parts of the world. But is it framed necessarily as kind of like circular economy topic research? And I think not. I think there's not as much that's kind of casting that circular economy way. So it's a great research opportunity. I think that positives and negatives of, kind of formalizing the informal economy, could be the same types of positive and negatives that have long been talked about in formalizing, whatever it is, street hawker centers or informal transport or informal businesses overall, that you can't manage what you can't measure. And the government is better able to measure the volume of activity in economies when things are reported and measured, so, and of course, an activity is done and it results in a commercial transaction, right? The government wants a piece of that transaction, right? So there's a tax implication there as well. Now, at the formal economy or informal economy level, the implications probably aren't that great, but the implications of gathering data about what's going on are important, right? If they were able to, you might not be able to directly measure the amount or the volume of waste being managed, but you could impute that based upon, the amount people are working, the number of person hours that have gone into work, something like that. And that may help you take a better inventory or auditing of circularity overall. So if it's informal, if it's invisible or underground, all aspects of it are. The transaction's invisible, but then so is the circular elements. You don't know. How much that circular element is, and thus you can't maybe identify opportunities to improve it as well. But then, of course, there's a literature that's outside of my field that talks about the pitfalls of formalizing, right? That these economies have emerged and they've created in a kind of equilibrium space, that people are occupying those gaps, like we were talking about with social enterprises, right? And enough people fill that gap. And not too many people or not too few people, it's enough people that basically the work goes around, right? And if you disrupt that, if you disrupt that equilibrium or you distort that, by introducing more market dynamics or more regulatory dynamics, then people will stand to lose. And some people stand to benefit from that, right? So any disruption is going to be paid, price is going to be paid by one, and the benefit is going to be gathered by another, right? So I think it's a political decision then to say, do we care about these people who have a livelihood here? The other option is to say, well, if these informal collectors, can we help them? Right? If we formalize it, but then provide systems or programs to help people who are either displaced or who lose a job, because we formalize it, somebody's got to hire them to do the work. And then they got to put them on payroll tax and they got to report this to the government, they got to go through all these things. Then they're gonna be, oh, forget it. We're not gonna do that. It's gonna be, it eats into their bottom line and it's a hassle to keep track of and on and on. So, who knows what happens then, right? Then you probably would get a continuation of that informal economy that it would push it further underground. Maybe there would be more hiding or more reticence to show what you're doing, something like that, right? Which is even more problem than the information having side of it, because then it's even harder to know what's going on, right? So I think there are interesting and compelling arguments either way. From a technocratic perspective, technocracy, right? Formalize it, measure it, manage it. From a non-technocratic perspective, you're dealing with people's lives. You're dealing with a system that, even if it's imperfect, the system over time evolves to be in equilibrium somehow, with some sort of structural friction within that. Right? It's just kind of like the labor markets overall. There's always a little bit of labor market friction, but over the long period of time, it generally gets into an equilibrium where we got about enough of people who have this skill to do this and enough to do this skill to do this and all the rest of that, and the willingness to do all those things. So I think it's an interesting balance. Finally, your second question about underground economy is very interesting. It's possible to push circular economy through underground economies. That's a great question. Deserves paper. Deserves paper. I was gonna be thinking entrepreneurial.
Very academic.
Very academic, yeah. I was also to be very academic, I'll say yes and no. Or the, yes and no.
Non-position.
Yeah, or the other popular answer is, it depends. So, it depends. But, if you want true inherent circularity, then it would be possible to achieve that by letting sort of underground systems go. I mean, underground systems by their definition can't be managed, right? If you're gonna say, well, we're gonna manage our underground economy, it's not an underground economy anymore, right? So an underground economy, you just sort of say, we might be vaguely aware it's there, but it's sort of hands off. Let it keep going, right? Now, if we get back to it's there, but it's sort of hands off, let it, okay, if things are gonna be valued in the marketplace, somebody's gonna find a way to get that thing and go sell it, right? That's pure market economics, right? You might be able to achieve some level of circularity through that. It'll optimize within constraints, constraint optimization, right? It'll do as well as it can within the constraints. And what are those constraints? Technical constraints. You'll be as circular as you can with the technology you have. You'll be as circular as you can with the information you have, with the management systems you have, lack of them, right? In the case of an informal economy, nobody's coordinating and managing it. The invisible hand manages it if you're going to take the economics perspective, right? Now, if you want to push through, you see that pushing the circular economy through underground economies is a little bit of an oxymoron, a little bit of a paradox. Because it gets back to the idea, can you push something that's informal? Can you push something that's underground? Who's pushing it? I think would be the first question. Are we talking about the government? The government said, oh, we're going to use our underground economies to help achieve circularity. Well, first, they're not underground anymore. And if you're going to try to control them, then you're going to have to get in there and see who's doing it, how much are they doing, what are the conditions. You're going to measure it all. And then if you can measure it all and you've got the optics, you've got the transparency, then somebody's going to go in and say, why are we taxing stuff? Because it's actually technically illegal. Technically. It's not immoral, I don't think. But it is technically not, you can't do a labor transaction without, reporting it to the government. Right? In all countries. So then all of a sudden it's not underground anymore. So it's like how can I put it? It's like turning on the light so you can see the dark. The dark's there, so I want to see it better. So turn on the light. I turn on the light. It's not dark anymore. What do I look? It's like we're gonna manage the informal economy. Well, as soon as you start managing it, it's not what it was. It's not informal anymore. As soon as you turn on the lights, it's not dark anymore. Right. So it's this weird kind of thing. With that said, finally, I guess in closing, if you did organize it a little bit, I guess you could have a situation where the government says, listen, some of these tasks are just going to take care of themselves, the waste management. But if you go to Korea or Hong Kong, you'll see a lot of older people who are cardboard. And the government knows they exist and, they're getting some money for the work that they do, but they probably don't report it. Sure, the government knows that it goes on, but it's like, what kind of political problem is it going to be if you start prosecuting this kind little old man or little old lady who's picking up cardboard? It's a benefit to us, right? Get some stuff out of the street. Somebody's going to recycle it, and you could just kind of like let it be. It's there, but you just sort of let it be. And I think technocratic governments are very uncomfortable doing that. If they know something is there, they're going to want to manage it and measure it. If they don't know something's there, they're going to poke around and tell you to. Something like that. So I think ultimately it gets down to your in a big place like this, possibly to know everything. There's a lot of stuff happening government doesn't know about. Whereas in Hong Kong, Singapore, much less, or in Amsterdam or something like that, they've got better systems, I guess, to know what's going on. That's maybe development role or is a level kind of different. China, I mean, quite a bit of underground economy in China, even still. And so it varies, but yeah, I haven't seen much of circular economy and underground economy. Maybe it's small scale, like, getting little recycled stuff and piles of stuff on the side of the street, but not like industrial scale, manufacturing scale. That's definitely something you could do a thesis on. So, a great question. Yeah, I know. And send me an email if you got any follow-up.
You already got masters for his dissertation.
Oh, you already,
For his dissertation.
oh, you already have a dissertation?
Yeah, he already have a masters.
Oh, you have a master's.
So this topic will be for his next future dissertation.
All right, well, yeah.
ASU.
Yeah, come to ASU. Yeah, bring your sunglasses. Come out to the desert. Yeah. Maybe we even measure volumes, or maybe we, do some other sort of easily measurable thing, right? It can, we can observe that and we can optimize those individual things by, better tech or better management principles or higher skilled labor or whatever. But that social aspect of it is a big deal, because the social aspect kind of, and when we talk about the social aspect, it is how does that translate into consumer preferences? And then it's not just that, people are gonna just start buying products that are circular. One, it's about the market dynamics. How do you get the circular price down to where people are gonna buy it anyway? If you're indifferent, right, if the circular product is not 1 penny more expensive than the regular one, then you might just be like, all right, if they're both equal, I'll just get the circular one anyway, as long as it's not an inferior product, right? Which is also a problem of perception of circular product, because the component's been used before, so it might not be as good of a product as it's brand new. That's a cultural thing, right? So there's that, and then there's also education and awareness, right? So if you talk about how far can you go to the circular economy without there being change in society, right? That's how far you can go, right? Your tech, your organizations, your policies, and taxation. But the society change is got to be deeper, because it's about beliefs and understandings, and then that's where you get into education, awareness. And even then, you can make people educated and aware, but they might still not care. In America, we try to make people educated and aware of gun violence. They don't care, right? I still want my gun, So then that's not just a awareness issue, that is a cultural values issue, right? And that is a calculation everybody makes internally. Right? How sustainable do I want to be? And we make a million little tiny decisions every day, that make us more or less sustainable, whether it's even across the street to throw my cup in the recycling. All these little things, right? And they all add up. So that step for the societal thing is really just going to be more about, I think a lot of people would say, just keep hammering in on the awareness issue, the education awareness issue, and eventually it's like turning a ship around, right? You're not going to flip a switch on it. It's just going to happen slowly. It's like equality, right? In the US, we have, and still do have, a racial prejudice problem in the US. It was really, really bad a long time ago. And Martin Luther King said the hallmark of, justice is, sort of extends over a long period of time, right? And you could say the same about, that's paraphrasing, by the way. But you could say the same about sustainability and culture, right? It's just going to be we love the satisfaction of saying, oh, one statistic. If everybody just knew this one statistic, then they would believe. And they won't, right? It's just long and slow. So those are harder things to do. The easier thing to do, buy the tech, train the workers, send your upper management off to a conference somewhere where they have a bunch of platitudes and sayings about sustainability, and that's about all you can do.
Okay, thank you very much for the question, Mbak Ansa. Do we have?
Is there a question from online?
We don't have any question
Oh,
yet
okay.
from Zoom. So I would like to also perhaps ask again for all participants in Zoom. If you would like to ask to Dr. Hadley, you could ask the question in the chat box. You can also mute yourself and ask the question directly. Okay, perhaps before we go to the next participant, if I would like also to ask a question, Dr. Hadley. So perhaps this question coming from the perspective of a non-expert in circular economy like myself. So my background is in computer engineering, and of perhaps the past decade, we have seen that rapid advances in technologies such as AI, IoT, blockchain, especially in AI. And many people believe that these technologies can be useful in many use cases. While also others also argue that they may create a new environmental and social challenges. And also your finding also, and you also stated that buying cool technologies alone does not mean that you have implemented circular economy. And given this reality, what I want to ask is that what can engineers like myself do to make a more meaningful contribution to the circular economy transition, especially perhaps in developing countries like Indonesia? As Ferdi also mentioned that the penetration of technology perhaps harder in the middle to low area. Should we focus on developing better technologies, or should we be thinking more about how technologies are integrated into organizational processes, business model, or other factors that you have mentioned earlier in your research before?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. It gets back to a lot of work I've been doing in the past decade on what I call technocratic rationalism. And technocratic doesn't necessarily technology. Technocratic is a kind of way of approaching decision making that's based on, we only see what we can measure. The things that we can't see or observe are not measured and thus are not factored into our decision making calculus. And so we overlook a lot of things. Technocratic governance in the US has led us to a lot of racial injustice, particularly in infrastructure development and housing and all the rest of that. We believe that we were solving social problems by providing physical infrastructure. And despite all kinds of evidence that the physical infrastructure was getting you about 1/3 of the way to what your goal was, but a majority of your goal was societal change. In this space who are coming out of engineering, science, chemistry, physics. We've got people all over the school of sustainability. And much further, not out of sight, but because they feel like they need to be in the social science, science, government, business, social science. They need to be in these spaces because they feel that's where the constraint is. So if you think about constraint theory, right, Goldbrat's constraint theory, right? I mean, you've got a system, and the system has a number of pinch points, bottlenecks. And if you only have the resources to optimize one bottleneck at a time, you find the worst bottleneck first, and you solve that, and you find the next worst bottleneck. I think we've done a better job solving those bottlenecks than we have solved the societal bottlenecks, the social science bottlenecks. And I think it was, I don't remember who said something to the effect of, paraphrasing again, that our technological capabilities will outpace our social or governance capabilities, right? And our tech will be far more sophisticated than the systems we have to govern and make decisions, right? So where's the bottleneck? The tech keeps running off into, the distance. And we're back here over, who's going to pay the tax and who's going to get credit and we're just humans. It's messy, right? And I think a lot of the tech engineering people saying, okay, well, I can keep optimizing and keep optimizing over here. You keep optimizing the tech, it's not going to move the needle at all because this is what's backing you up, right? So I think that engineers, I wouldn't advocate all engineers to just jump off the ledge and go into social science because we need the engineers and the technical people and the scientists. That's how ideally we base a lot of our decision would be on the science and the knowledge around that in certain ways. But I think that having a better realization of the context, all this operates in a social context. So Smart City says too, there's this belief that you could just, get all this broadband and these cables start connecting IoT array of things, IoT Internet of Things and all this stuff. And then basically the computers will live our lives for us. And I think in a certain way now we're in a new generation of believing that, but it's not the smart stuff anymore. It's the AI stuff, right? But, there are social and political realities that govern all of this. And, so if, I don't know if understanding those realities will change the nature of the work you do, just the core work, right? How you design circuits and cables and GPUs and all the rest of that. But, maybe communicating that to the public, communicating the importance of the significance of the potential of the technology to the public, you could have a broader, case to make if you're at least aware of the social and political issues that are around. Look at AI. AI. In fact, I remember when COVID, I was in Thailand, teaching in Thailand when COVID broke, and we were all thinking about like, well, first of all, we're going to survive this and all the rest of it. And then some people started talking about like, well, maybe we should write about this. And some of my colleagues were, we can't write about it without having any knowledge. You're not so forget it. Well, that's the business of my doctor then. I'm not worried about it. Well, COVID came to all of our doorsteps and it became, it went from an epidemiological issue to a social, political, economic, geopolitical, cultural, artistic, everything. It consumed our whole society. Right. So, I think, again, AI might be the same way, right? Where it's like, okay, write about AI, right? You're not tech, right? But AI is a social, political, jobs related, it's an equity issue. It's all of these things wrapped up in one. Circular economy to a certain degree. I don't think circular economy touches so keenly on the social justice and equity issues, although it may be there, definitely AI, right? So, being aware of those things and then being maybe depending on where you stand in your own values, being an ally of, certain, people have concern about, oh, AI could have some real problems for our environment. AI can have some real problems taking people's jobs. It can have some real problems creating distrust and friction in society. Right, and being allied to that, just simply you're the expert on the tech, but also you're at the table when these discussions are being talked about, and you're offering, your input and maybe your support for something like fair AI, fair use of these technologies, as opposed to just being neutral and saying, well, whatever they do, they're going to take jobs, people are going to die, people are going to whatever, that's not my business. Well, that is your business because it's the technology you're designing. So it's empathy, you stay in your lane. We all try to stay in our lanes, right? But it's understanding that these issues are out there and maybe supporting progress on those other issues. You'd be surprised how much credibility you probably already know you get when you go into policy spaces and social science spaces with your tech background. Because people will shut up and listen to you when you start talking about the tech because they don't know anything about it. Right. So there's a place for you at that table. And you can use that to push for better things, better governance, better society that comes out of all of this. Good question.
Okay, thank you very much for the answer, Dr. Haflin. Do we have any more question? Yeah, please.
So I want to say thank you, but I'm sorry, my voice is obviously so I find it hard to speak. Yeah. I'm sorry, my voice is not that really, so I'll have to say I'll do my best.
That's all right. Yeah.
Okay. Can I?
Yeah. I'm closer to yeah. Some of the tables. This is a seat at the table for everyone. Yes.
Thank you.
All right.
Introduce yourself.
Okay. First of all, let me say thank you for the time. Other opportunities to come here. It's not actually representation. I was studying in tax administrations. Basically, I was the junior university. So I refer to this basic research about open text. Several in the so my research is about mental health. Okay, so why I choose this topic because I was wondering why we should still working about waste management system. There's a lot of problem there. So I'd like to take knowing more about the waste management, especially for the landfill tax itself. So my question is, in your opinion, what your thinking about landfill tax is economy because as we say as or because there's simple processes before the resources being west to the landfill. So what's your opinion in your in your perspective in the landfill system itself? Why it is it connected or related to this about it's can you explain to me more about the development system, the development context? Is it connected?
So it's an interesting point. I've not seen a lot of work connecting circular economy and the landfill tax. I think there's some interesting opportunities there. Again, creating economic incentives for producers to find other uses for scrap, that they produce in their systems, and also if they have take back programs for the elements or components of used products that they take back that they don't actually use and continue to throw away. I think that implementing that, well, first of all, I have to look at the structure of it, right? How is that designed? So when you say there's a landfill tax, you mean that if I am a producer and I come up with, this much waste, I go to the landfill, somehow that's measured, somehow that tax goes to as the entity that's putting the material in the landfill, I'm taxed for that?
Basically, the tax system is being imposed for the amount of the waste to the landfill based on the tonnage.
Based on tonnage. And so that gets measured in some stage, right? How does that get measured?
Based on much.
Okay, but do
the
the companies self-report or do they get weighed? I mean, how do you actually implement that? Like, how do you check it?
Basically, the level tax itself isn't implemented yet in Asia, so
Okay.
our country is it possible for the nation to implement the activities? So in your perspective, is it the level that will support the economy? There's like a recycling process before it's really the waste being
Yeah.
okay.
Sure, so I think in principle, yes, we can, because it's a disincentive to throw stuff away. So anything we can do to make that economically make better sense to try to figure out what to do with this waste. The implementation of it's a different question, and in fact, probably the implementation of it is not even really question. I think it's a technical question, it's a regulatory question. At some stage, the information has to be gathered in order to establish a fair basis for the taxation. And if companies are going to have to weigh and self-report, you got a couple of problems there. One company, they're going to be doing that. How do you monitor that? I mean, things, and then but then is your truck coming to the landfill, or are you subcontracted that? If you subcontract that with a trash sort of pickup and delivery company, waste management company, whatever they come, maybe it's their obligation to, part of their value add is they measure the waste that they pick up from you. And then they report that to the government, and then they report who they picked it up from, and then the government comes back, leaves like a triangle. And the government comes up to you and says, okay, the company picked up your waste, said they weighed it and it was 2 tons. Now you owe this, right? But, then again, there's always opportunity. I mean, the company that picks it up could be incentivized to underreport. All the rest of that, you could say, well, I know it's 2 tons. Tell them it's 1 ton and there's, or something like that. So it's monitoring and enforcement is a real problem. The third option would be it's weighed when it enters the landfill. And there's a facility there, and the landfill includes the infrastructure to weigh it, so that, and then that cost is imposed on the government. All right, and then whatever it is, so the government might try to recover its cost by charging you a little bit, the tax itself. So they weigh it when it comes in, and then it goes. So, but again, that requires a little more money from the government and some employment and all the rest of it. So that would seem to make sense. So you have to figure out kind of a way, and it's an interesting thought experiment to see, how can you design that to be most efficient, where you close off opportunities for malfeasance, right? You shut out opportunities to just underreport or lie, right? Because tax evasion, as you well know, is a thing everywhere and all over the world. But I think that can complement circular economy efforts. I think it kind of comes to the front door, but it doesn't go any further. It just comes to the front door because all it does is say, don't give us waste that you could have used. It doesn't go into any more detail about, well, how are you going to reduce your waste? Because we talked today about many ways you can reduce the waste, designing products and product take back programs and extended producer responsibility and all the rest of that. So a waste, taxing landfills doesn't really say anything about all that. It just goes to the front door and says minimize your waste. That's it. But there's a role for that, because if you design it correctly, then there's an economic incentive. And then now you could, if there's an economic incentive to not to produce a lot of waste, when you get behind the front door, you can't control what they're doing, but there could be also malfeasance there as well. There could be informal channels of waste disposal. So you got to monitor that. So it can create different markets, or it creates informal markets, right? So it says, oh, well, maybe in the middle of the night at 3 a.m., my buddy with the pickup truck comes down here and hauls away all the metal.
Yeah.
Right? And it happens under cover of darkness, and he doesn't report it. He throws it in the, his backyard, and nobody knows.
Yeah.
So it's like whack-a-mole. If you have that game at the fair where you have a little mallet, you hit the mole when it comes up, and then the mole comes to here and you hit it and you hit it there. It's right. It's like it's like pushing bubbles down. It's like push one down and another one comes up, right? So people and smart people will always be finding a way to try to get around it. And tax is the best example in the world of this. Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah. But it's a good question. I think it's a good first step.
Yeah.
In combination with a lot of the other things. Yeah, it needs to be looked at more for sure. So you're welcome. Yeah, thanks for the good question.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. I think as the time limits us, that will be the last question. Once again, thank you everyone for the thoughtful question and answer session. And before we proceed to the last agenda, allow me to briefly reflect on several key insights of today's session. The first one would be, although circular economy has become a recognized sustainable framework, the world remains largely locked into linear system of production, and also this highlight the significant work that still lies ahead us. Second, Dr. Hartley research demonstrate that circular economy transition can take different form across regions. Lessons from Europe remain valuable, but Asian economies must develop approaches that reflect their own institutional, economics, and cultural status. One strongest message from this discussion is that circular economy is ultimately about transformation, changes not only in technology, but also in business models, organizational culture, governance systems, and the way we value is created throughout the economy. And on behalf of UI GreenMetric, I would like to express our appreciation for sharing research, your expertise, and also insight with us today. And I think I'll stop there for the Q&A session. I'll give back the time to Mrs. Raihana. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mirza, for moderating the discussion, and thank you, Dr. Sadli, for sharing your valuable knowledge, and also all the participants participating in the discussion and question answer session. I think that's all for today. But maybe before we close today's event, Pak Vishnu will give you some token of appreciation.
Program of circular economy.
Yes.
Oh, thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
From water bottle, top of the
Yes.
bottle,
Top of the.
the.
Bottle top, bottle caps.
Bottle,
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
All right, very good. Awesome. So we have a group picture in front of
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
Beautiful mural. Yes.
Especially you should wear, you should wear the hat.
There's, I should wear a hat, sure.
Yeah.
All right. A hat.
So you should wear it
Yeah.
in front of Arizona State
We're
University.
everywhere. Okay. Let's have a group picture.
Okay, good, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Foto tayo. Siapa yang fotoin?
Ya,
Hah?
ada
Orang
I know, it's nice. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very cool.
Sengaja, biar untuk sesi gini kan. Yeah, Indonesians, if we have a meeting and we have a speaker together, that's why I'm deciding tomorrow.
Yeah, no, this is, it's doing its job, isn't it?
Yeah. So that's why it's deciding tomorrow, main meeting. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
Mobil buat.
Mas Nani, bisa.
Oh gitu.
Absolutely.
Atau
9:30
Well, you're very